continuing our look at Luke chapter 22 this week, and we're picking up, kind of looking at two pieces, but specifically looking at verses 31 to 34, where Jesus is moving, he's still sitting at the meal with his disciples, but he's moving the conversation along, and he has something to say to Peter. And I don't know, there's some moments where you think, oh, I'm desperate to know what Jesus would say with me if I was in the room with him. But this is one of those moments where you're thinking, careful what you wish for a little bit. Because essentially Jesus predicts that Peter's going to betray him, that he's going to deny that he even knows him. And in the moment when Jesus would, I guess, need him most in the way a human being needs another human being, Peter will turn his back. And we see later on in this same chapter, in verses 54 to 62, we see how that plays out. And it's an interesting moment. But what stood out to me as I looked at this, and I want you to take a look with me, is look at verse 32. Because Jesus makes this sort of prediction, but actually there's a lot of hopefulness if you have an eye to see it. In verse 32, Jesus is saying to Peter, he says, I have prayed for you, Simon, being Simon Peter, I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Now, I don't know about you, but it just struck me. I'm not even sure that I noticed that before, but I don't know there are some people in my life, a handful, very few, who if they offer to pray for me, I always feel a bit like I watch the room to see if something moves, because there's just something about their prayer. And so I just cannot imagine the moment. I've had moments where good friends have said, Chrissy, we were talking about you, wanting to know how we could support you. And you think, you were talking about me when I wasn't in the room and you want to help me? So this thought that Jesus says, I was praying for you in the midst of all that he's experiencing, he knows it's the last moments of his life. Can you imagine Peter reflecting back with that hindsight in the future and saying, the moment, the hours before Jesus died, he was praying for me. And he said to Peter that he was praying for two things. And this is where this hopefulness, he says first that he was praying that Peter's faith wouldn't fail. And he was praying that when he came back, he would strengthen his brothers. So it sounds like Jesus is telling Peter, look, hope is not lost. But what I think is interesting about this is he prays first that his faith won't fail. He's praying that the mistake that Peter makes does not break him. That this mistake isn't so terrible that Peter says, I cannot come back from this. I feel too awful. And he prays as well that when he comes back, he'll strengthen his brothers, that actually he'll have the courage, that even if he still has faith, that he still has the courage to come back and own the mistake and strengthen others. You notice what Jesus doesn't do is he doesn't pray that Peter won't make the mistake. Did you catch that? I think I would want Jesus to pray to make me perfect. I just would like to avoid the whole messy business, but he doesn't do that. He doesn't pray that. Instead, he prays only that Peter will survive it and that he will be strong enough to come back and to use that to serve others. And we know that Peter's reaction in verse 62, after Peter has done the very thing that Jesus said he would do, that he could not imagine that he would ever do, that Peter's, I would never do that, Jesus. In verse 62, all it says is that Peter goes outside and he wept bitterly. That he was absolutely devastated to know that he had become the thing that he swore he would never become. And yet what Jesus had prayed is that in that moment, he would be able to recognize his mistake and repent, that he would be able to recognize it and repent, because that is the only way to come back from a devastating mistake. If you hang on to it and say, no, I refuse to recognize I've done wrong and refuse to repent, then you cannot come back from the mistake. And so Jesus says, I'm praying that it won't break you. I'm praying that, like Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, you'd have the courage like the psalmist to say, search my heart and tell me if there's any offensive way in me. Show me the mistake, Jesus, and give me the courage to repent. And then when we've repented, Jesus prays that we would have the courage to let go of our embarrassment and our humiliation and to say, I made a mistake, but I want to come back because I want to serve my family. I want to be with my family. I hope that if you're in a place today where perhaps you've made a mistake, and if you're not, you will be, I can assure you of that, because we all do. I hope in that moment when you make a mistake that you'll remember that Jesus is praying for you, And what he's praying is that you won't allow that mistake to break you, that it will not tear apart your faith, and that it won't hold you captive to the point that you actually cannot come back and serve your family. Jesus is praying for you. Recognize the mistake, repent, and come back to your family.